Spiritual counterfeit will come, quite possibly being all things to all people. He will be able to unite the world's faiths with a political agenda, coming as this messianic figure, posing as having a capability of restoring prosperity and stability in an atmosphere of utter chaos that has people terrified. In their terror about what's transpiring environmentally, what's transpiring strategically and economically, they will look to a man instead of to God, and they'll get one. This is the one the New Testament calls the man of sin, the Antichrist, and he will come to power assisted by a corrupted global religious system.
Is there, the possibility of one world leader emerging? Well, I would say the country which has the greatest potential to create world peace, despite all the mistakes which it has made and is making, is the US.
The people of the world can live together in peace. We know that is God's vision. Now that must be our work here on earth. Thank you, and may God's peace be upon you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The world is hungry for peace. The world is hungry for leadership towards peace. I think if people are expecting a single leader to come through and deliver, and I think a year ago I would have said clearly the clearest candidate was Barack Obama. Then I think Barack Obama himself has demonstrated that the model of a single person coming through, knocking heads together if you like, and then solving these issues, it's really never going to work.
We need a leader, and we need a core of people surrounding that leader, not just one man, but we need the leader to deliver the message. In other words, a new world order, not the sort that you hear about on conspiracy theory websites, not the sort that's all about chipping people and, control of some inner coterie, but a new world order which actually works for everyone and creates prosperity and starts with regional infrastructures and eventually moves towards a proper, prosperous, global civilization of which everyone on the planet can be proud, and which leads to a new, a new age for mankind. I'm not saying that's what we're necessarily going to wind up with. I'm saying that with the right kind of leadership, well, I'm a positive person. I mean, it's very difficult not to, to do this sort of work if you're not, because you'd be constantly depressed. But no, so what you're really wondering about is the flip side. I've presented the positive vision of the New World Order, and you're saying, what's the negative side of the New World Order? Oh, right, well, that's actually not so hard.
Cannot move towards a world government without a crisis and without people losing faith in their national sovereignty. They need to have confidence in something that'll supersede that and that'll rescue them, in essence.
We could wind up in a situation where an attack by Israel on Iran actually triggers a series of orchestrated events around the world through Iran's proxies. As a result of that, we wind up with people being scared. And they'll be scared because the war is effectively, in that case, going to be brought to their doorstep. It's not something which is happening in the Middle East. It's not something which is happening, on board a ship in the Straits of Hormuz. It's something which is actually happening in their day-to-day lives. And if there were a series of such orchestrated attacks, then I think you'd be looking at people wanting some kind of leadership, someone who could protect them. And then you would be looking at state control. They'll say, keep us safe. They will be handing themselves over to the state and saying, what can you do to keep us safe? And yes, that could result in the wrong sort of New World Order. That could result in tyranny. That could result in the rise of leaders of the Hitler type.
The victim of one world leader turning into a Hitler will be democracy, justice, freedom. There'll be nobody to fight that leader. In various countries during the 20th century, you had the rise of despots, you had the Hitlers, you had the Stalins, you had the Mao Tse-tungs, you had the Pol Pots. All at that stage, at the national level, could be contained. They caused, like Hitler, caused world wars, but there was a group of countries that fought against them, managed to stop them. Freedom was not the victim in the end. Democracy was not the victim in the end. Imagine no nation states, imagine one global government and someone like Hitler coming to power. What's to stop that? Who's to fight him?
We hope that never happens, because that what it would do for our civil liberties and what it will do for, the nature of man himself is frightening.
He, the Antichrist, also forced everyone, small or great, rich or poor, free or slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark. Revelation 20, verse 4. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony for Jesus and because of the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast or his image and had not received his mark on their foreheads or their hands. Let's watch a film.
The scriptures speak of a new kind of currency that will take place, some would suggest in the form of some kind of a microchip, on the forehead or on the right hand, by which people will be able to buy and sell, but not be able to buy and sell without it. Increasingly, financial institutions are looking to new technologies to cope with this problem of finding a means of currency that will function the way credit cards do, but will not be a credit card. That will not be something that which you can easily counterfeit or easily defraud someone with. Well, obviously, implantation is the direction these technologies are generally taking.
The next revolution, unquestionably, is going to be nanotechnology. That's the ability to create structures that will manipulate matter at the atomic or molecular level. The way that could manifest is in various small chips, turning human beings into walking technology.
Implantation is already beginning to take place experimentally on humans. The essential technology already exists. Well, the book of Revelation tells us that will be a final currency. No one will be able to buy and sell without it.
Whoever controls that technology will ultimately, fundamentally control our lives. And it is very much a case that ultimately it'll be government that does control and run all of those technologies. We see now, particularly with governments nationalizing various industries, regulating various industries, they will have control, and those technologies will dominate and control our lives and can be used for nefarious purposes.
It's a whole system that is designed to collapse you down into a single official identity that the only way you can access certainly public services and increasingly live your life in a normal fashion would be if you were using your officially assigned sort of identity to confirm facts about yourself. We're not against any particular technology per se. It's that once you've got these technologies in place, if you haven't got proper safeguards, if you haven't got proper oversight, if you've just got this basic presumption, as pretty much all governments and companies seem to have, that once they've got the data, it's theirs, what they fail to see is that that data is ours. If it's about me, it's mine. Yeah? And if it's going to do something or damage to anyone, it's going to do damage to me. Yeah? Which is why it's so important that when it comes to control, the person who should be in control is me and you, and not some, overarching international, national, system that says, oh, well, in order to, earn your crust and pay for things and do this, that, and the other, you have to basically live under a constant state of surveillance. This new e-passport, which has, photograph and a chip and antenna embedded in the back of the photo page, was introduced, they said, in order to enhance security. It does exactly the opposite. The government's very fond of pointing out that I think 20 or 21 out of 24 EU states have an ID card. What they don't actually go on to sort of mention is the fact that the vast majority of those, 19 of those, were imposed on their populations or extended to cover the entire population under either Nazi or Soviet occupation or a homegrown dictator. And we have to learn from history on this one. You know, we can't just assume because, oh well, it's the 21st century now, you know, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, all these people, you know, that's all in the history books, that all happened then, it couldn't possibly happen again. I'm afraid that would be very, very naive. The very fact that one person can be identified as being a part of one group and another person can be identified as being another group can end up being a death sentence.
So we've really got to examine whether these prophecies that were made, let's not forget, over 2,000 years ago, is the technology there when they were talking about, Jacob was talking about the mark being on the right hand or on the forehead, the mark being a potential microchip containing your banking details, so your credit card or your credit history, and your ability to buy and sell. Well, when you examine it like this, you think, well, you know, this is the technology is unquestionably there. I have 2 dogs; they're both chipped. The wherewithal is there. It's a relatively simple process, and it certainly can happen. It may probably be happening in test sites around the world as we speak. Scary to think about it. And another thing that crosses my mind is it's clearly stated that it's the right hand. Why would it be the right hand? What significance is that? And if you don't play ball with these people, you get your head chopped off. In what part of the world would that happen? Does that happen? Certainly worth thinking about.
Many will strive for peace in the Middle East, yet prophecy indicates Russia, Iran, Turkey, and others will war with Israel. It was predicted, but will it happen? Both the book of Revelation and the prophet Daniel speak of this last 7 years of human history being divided into 2 halves. At the onset of this 7-year period, a peace treaty proposing to bring peace to the Middle East between Israel and the nations surrounding it will be inaugurated, which will be broken halfway through by this person whom we call the Antichrist. This person who's going to come, try to persuade the Jews he is some kind of a deliverer figure and bring a peace to the Middle East, but he will also not simply deceive Israel. He will deceive the nations. He will come as a man of peace, but he'll actually be a man of war.
If you look at the history of the resolution of intractable conflicts, it's often the most radical people, the ones most stuck in the mud, most difficult to move, who in the end are the ones that create peace, primarily because they are able to bring the majority of their constituency with them. I'm optimistic still that a figure like Netanyahu can create consensus or move Israel in the right direction. That's not based on any fact, because anybody that looks at the situation today, anybody you talk to, will be quite pessimistic about the outcome. But solutions can come out from nowhere.
If Israel is going to survive, it has to become part of a wider architecture, and that is going to have to be orchestrated by the US.
Too much blood has been shed. All of us have a responsibility to work for the day when the mothers of Israelis and Palestinians can see their children grow up without fear, when the Holy Land of the 3 great faiths is the place of peace that God intended it to be.
Does the US step up to the plate, or doesn't it? We'll wait to see. We hope the news will be good, because if not, I see a very, very destabilizing effect for the region and for the world.
Notice now how many people have pushed for peace treaties and they've not worked. Oslo being one of them. Oslo I, Oslo II, Camp David. None of these peace treaties have been able to deliver what they promise. Well, none of them will be able to deliver what they promise. The worst is yet to come. Daniel also predicted that when these events do transpire, we are going to see Persia, that is Iran, emerging as a strategic threat to Israel's existence, leading up to some kind of a terrible conflict.
Today, an unprecedented threat to humanity looms large. A radical Iranian regime, armed with nuclear weapons, could bring an end to the era of nuclear peace that the world has enjoyed for the last 65 years.
I mean, yes, Ahmadinejad has made these statements, but again, they can be explained in terms other than desiring a nuclear holocaust.
Do I really think, despite the rhetoric Ahmadinejad's used about wiping Israel off the face of the earth and so on, I don't think so. I really don't think that's what we should be worrying about.
I think a more likely scenario for the exchange of nuclear weapons is things getting out of control. You've got the Israelis with nuclear weapons. They're unlikely to use them, I would say, first, but they might get into a threatened situation and then find that it's very difficult not to use them.
If you had a situation in which Israel went to war with Iran, how is Iran going to respond? Well, it's going to respond through its proxies. And this is where you wind up with a global catastrophe. Because they do have capability. Whether we like it or not, they have capability in probably on every continent, in every city, and maybe even in many smaller regions around the world. And we know that. So it will be very difficult to prove who's doing what, but we will suddenly see at that moment a spark of international terrorist activity, some of which will be copycatting, much of which will be inspired as a result of or orchestrated directly through Iran. So I think that is the greatest danger, and that's the thing that needs to be avoided.
Why would Russia align itself with Iran when Russia itself is afraid of what Iran represents, Islamic fundamentalism? It does not seem to make any strategic sense or any logical sense, except that Russia could see Iran as a mechanism to bring about such an instability in the Middle East where Arab oil would no longer be reliable and the value of Russian oil and natural gas would go through the roof, making Russia the new Saudi Arabia. That is one possible explanation some people have cited. Whatever explanation you wish to give to what seems to be illogical behavior by Russia, by arming Iran, by giving it certain kinds of technologies, one thing is for sure. We are told by Ezekiel, Russia, Turkey, and certainly the nations of Soviet Central Asia, as it was once known, will come into some kind of a military confederation with Iran in order to invade Israel, but it will fail due to divine intervention that will in part involve natural disasters.
Now, Russia has actually used Iran in many respects up to this point. Russia has assisted them with the development of their nuclear program.
The Iranians are clearly Islamic. They are an Islamic revolution, and therefore they have a dangerous role to play in terms of an example to the Central Asian states, where there's, again, very strong Muslim populations which threaten the territorial integrity of Russia. Nevertheless, in terms of strategic relationship, Iran has oil. Iran is a big player in the region. There is a possibility of Russia playing a distinctive role if they can develop a relationship with Iran. And so it tries to distance itself from the United States, who of course has a very, very close relationship with Israel. That means that the Russians and the Israelis are not going to see eye to eye.
Turkey rising as a potential enemy? Yes, it's possible.
Turkey is one of the very few states that has been a friend of Israel within the Muslim world. If they lose Turkey, it isolates Israel much more.
Russia signed an agreement with Turkey to build a $20 billion nuclear facility, 4.8 gigawatts, actually in Turkey. Russia will provide the expertise and will hold 51% of the shares in this consortium. Now you tell me what that means for the region. Turkey actually has power, and its power, it has the power to create great peace in the region, actually, through its economic enterprises and Davutoglu's vision, their current foreign minister's vision. But equally, that power could be used in the opposite way, and it could actually be a catalyst for war.
So the prophecies seem to be quite accurate. Spooky. Is this all a coincidence? I'm thinking not. I don't know what you think.
The constellation of global events are almost complete. The predictions are a clear, visible sign.
Right, our next chapter. A mountain splits water from under a great temple, a gate sealed. On that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives east of Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west, forming a great valley. On that day living water will flow out from Jerusalem, half to the Dead Sea and half to the Mediterranean Sea.
The Hebrew prophet Isaiah said the return of the Messiah would actually commence in southern Jordan around the rock fortress city of Petra, but the Messiah would stand on the Mount of Olives. This exactly echoes what is said in the New Testament. When Jesus ascended from the Mount of Olives, he would return in the same way to the same location. And the Mount of Olives would split, presumably at the cleft where there's a known fissure. It's also predicted that water would come from underneath a water table in Jerusalem and flow in the direction of the Dead Sea.
My name is Usher Alchel. I've been working in the site of the city of David for almost 10 years. I'm an archaeologist trained at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Israel is situated along the Syro-African Rift, the fault line that separates between Europe and Africa. Earthquakes have affected this region from antiquity. The prophets talk about how, in the end of days, an earthquake will split Mount Olives in half, and the waters of Jerusalem, like these below us, will both flow to the Dead Sea and to the Mediterranean. But where we are now, as we said, earthquakes have affected this region and have the potential of changing its topography.
The man brought me back to the entrance of the temple, and I saw water coming out from under the threshold of the temple towards the east.
There will have to be a rebuilding of the temple in the book of Revelation, chapter 11, as it were a tribulational temple. It'll have to happen. And as we speak, there are yeshivas, Jewish religious schools, dedicated to resurrecting the ancient Levitical priesthood. There's a temple institute that is in the process of collecting, restoring, designing the artifacts necessary to reintroduce Levitical worship. It's underway even as we speak.
The Torah obligates us. Make me a sanctuary and I will dwell among the people. And this is exactly what we are doing. We are trying to build the house of God, the third temple, as prophesied by the prophets, each and every one of them, because that is the center core of the book, to respond to the command, to the obligation of the Word of God. Make me a sanctuary and I will dwell amongst you. So we began with the major vessels. The showbread table, the incense altar, the menorah, the musical instruments, the vestments of the high priest. And step by step, we have already concluded over 70 of the vessels. If we only began 25 years ago with a handful of people, we presently have over 100,000 people who visit us annually. We have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people from all around the world who hook into our website daily and are trying to be part of this godly, historical phenomenon. The time has come that the world be reunited around the one and only God, where God has chosen, Jerusalem. From the very first moment we actually begin, it should take between a year to 2 years to build.
Then the man, an angel, brought me back to the outer gate of the sanctuary, the one facing east, and it was shut. The Lord said to me, "This gate is to remain shut."
We have a prophecy in the book of Ezekiel that the east gate would be, as it were, blocked up or plugged up. Suleiman the Magnificent understanding the Jewish belief that the Messiah would come through the East Gate, put a cemetery in front of it, because Jews would be ritually defiled had they tried to enter through the East Gate via a cemetery, having even indirect contact with the corpse. But he also cemented it up, fulfilling this prophecy unbeknownst to him. However, God's Spirit will again enter through that gate at the end of the age. Despite the desires of many people over the centuries really to reopen it, it still remains closed, as Ezekiel prophesied it would. It's entirely visible today, again opposite the cleft in the Mount of Olives, overlooking the Kidron Valley, in the wall of Jerusalem on the east side of the old city. Still there, just as Ezekiel said.
Ezekiel again. The man brought me back to the entrance of the temple, and I saw water coming out from under the threshold of the temple towards the east. This water flows towards the eastern region, and it goes down into the Arabah, where it enters the sea. Swarms of living creatures will live wherever the rivers flow. There will be large numbers of fish, because this water flows there and makes the salt water fresh. So where the river flows, everything will live. Okay, so not all of this has come to pass yet. The temple is still to be built, if it's to be built, but certainly looking at it, preparations are very much underway, down to finite detail. It's almost as though they're looking at the prophecies as an instruction manual in terms of what to make for the Messiah. We've seen evidence of water under Jerusalem, so something that was predicted 2,500 years ago seems to be based pretty much on fact. It's all proving to be very, very feasible and very possible, and very spooky that it was predicted 2,500 years ago when they didn't know about fault lines, and we've just seen that Jerusalem is on top of a fault line. Israel didn't exist until 1948, so again, the whole we can't say coincidence. There's something going on here. There's something that is seemingly real about all these prophecies. Moving on, the rise of an Eastern superpower and the construction of a great dam. Jesus speaks in his revelation to the Apostle John. Release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates, and the 4 angels who had been kept ready for this very hour and day and month and year were released to kill. The number of the mounted troops was 200 million. I heard their number. Another revelation. The 6th angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. Then they gathered the kings together to the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon.
The scriptures speak of the kings of the East invading the Middle East. Genghis Khan almost attempted this, but never did. It was not the proper time for it to happen. The only nations in the world that could assemble an army of 200 million obviously would be in the Far East. Some had speculated it's Sin, the ancient name for China. Be that as it may, it would have to cross the Euphrates River. Even as we speak, there is a dam in Turkey which could restrict or even block the flow of the waters into the Mesopotamian Delta, the Fertile Crescent, the Euphrates, that could literally make this particular prophecy happen. China is increasingly looking to the Middle East because of oil. I'm not necessarily saying it must be China, but it doesn't leave too many other possibilities. And certainly what we see happening is already beginning to materialize in terms of practical possibility.
In terms of the technology and the dam and the drying of the Euphrates, it's uncannily spooky that could be done now, and again, how that could have been predicted. I don't know, what do you think?
Despite frantic efforts, the world will witness the greatest Holocaust of all time. It was predicted, but will it happen?
Well, here we are. Here's the big one. Armageddon and the day the earth will stand still. Jesus speaks in Revelation 16, verse 16. Then they gathered the kings together to the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. Jesus speaks as quoted by Matthew. For then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened.
There are all sorts of ways in which one can cut the cake, if you like. You could say, for example, that the Americans and Russians, between them, possess 97% of the world's nuclear arsenals. In that sense, if there was going to be an accident or some war and all-out nuclear exchange, then it's most likely to be between those two. Out of the states with nuclear weapons, it's very difficult to pin, though I would say of them, Pakistan is probably the biggest problem. But then again, Israel, I haven't mentioned Israel. Israel exists in a very difficult relationship with its neighbours, and although none of its neighbours yet have a nuclear weapon to balance them, and nobody really seriously thinks that Israel will launch nuclear weapons anytime soon, it could very quickly get into some sort of conflict situation where nuclear weapons may come into play. That's more likely the closer Iran gets to acquiring a nuclear weapons capability. And that Iranian-Israeli relationship is one that I think we need to watch over the next few years as a potential spark point.
Jeremiah 25, verse 33. At that time, those slain by the Lord will be everywhere, from one end of the earth to the other. They will not be mourned, or gathered up, or buried, but will be like refuse lying on the ground. I have the vision in my head of millions of slain bodies lying around, whether it's as a result of some massive device, megaton bomb, nuclear bomb. But from what this is saying, it is talking about the whole globe. It's utterly frightening and sadly possible.
If nuclear weapons were used, either in the Middle East or I would say in the India-Pakistan relationship, you would, or if you had a nuclear weapon explode in London or New York or Paris or any city in the world, it would be a game changer. September the 11th multiplied 100. And the reason for that is because people would recognise the vulnerability of modern society. You would get a significant immediate reduction in the confidence of urban living. You would get a change in the way people related to each other on the international scene. And then you'd have two significant options. You'd have, we all need nuclear weapons to defend ourselves option, business as usual, but actually everybody engaging, and a distinct deterioration of security, and then a sort of Mad Max scenario. Or you could get a recognition that actually the problem, the threat from nuclear weapons is the nuclear weapons themselves, and we need to triple or multiply our efforts to get rid of them once and for all. And I know that's an optimistic scenario. Nuclear weapons are used and then everyone wakes up to their senses. But we will face that choice.
We are specifically warned by Jesus that unless he returned, no human flesh would be saved. The human race would bring itself to the point of extinction. Technologically, that was not possible until the 20th century. It is easy to see how if there is a nuclear exchange in even one area of the world, it can easily spill over into a tinderbox effect globally. It was not possible either strategically or technologically up until the 1940s, but it's certainly possible now.